help an attorney. We got time for questions in a short recess. Yes, sir.
Only the thing that we talk about what the fund actually reported for and brought about. In 1966, I think the natural study taken, the average life coal mine, longevity of the coal mine was 57 years in 1946, time of the fund. The average life of a worker in general was 67 years. If you have to enter the fund, with this, what you just described, the longevity of the average worker grew from 67 to 69. From the coal mine in 1966 went from 57 to 73, which is a very interesting point.
Yeah, I know. I've seen that statistic. I'm not sure I understand. The coal miner caught up with the population, according to that report which the fund published, and surpassed it in life expectancy. Well, in judicial aspects and legislative aspects of the Blacklung question. Blacklung is, of course, not a scientific term. It is a very graphic, semi-political term to refer to that constellation of troubles that occur to coal miners that make give them chest symptoms. Most of us who talk about Blacklung are referring to coworkers pneumoconiosis. Coworkers pneumoconiosis is a disease of the lung caused by the inhalation of coal mine dust and the body's reaction to that. Now you will, I hope, be careful to note that I use the term coal mine dust rather than coal dust, because coal mine dust contains not only carbonaceous material, carbon, but depending on the kind of mine, the kind of scene, the geology in the mine, the rank of coal, as well as the nature of the technical operation that the miners engaged in, coal mine dust can contain silicon as well. There is sand in a coal mine that's brought into the mine to help with the traction on the rails in certain operations. That is, it wasn't, the good Lord didn't put it in the coal mine, it was brought there. But it's used in one coal mining operation and it's part of coal mine dust. There's iron in coal mine dust, and there are other elements, none of which, except for silicon carbon, have been definitely associated with noxious properties. But that issue could theoretically lend itself to further research and development. For the most part, we're talking, therefore, when we talk about coal mine dust, of the effects, by and large, of coal dust itself, carbon, and silicon. In the anthracite industry, the coal is different, has a higher silicon content. There is a higher amount of disability and abnormal X-rays among anthracite miners. Well, why is Blacklung a controversy? What's all the flack? Why isn't it a simple open and shut case? I think this is what I'm going to try to focus for you this evening. Maybe we can use that as a basis for discussion. And I've listed 7 elements of the confusion around Blacklung. 1, the fact that chest symptoms and chest disease is non-specific. Okay? There are lots of chest diseases. As far as the patient is concerned, there's only one chest disease, I'm short breath. All right? Or I cough, or I spit. And so the first problem about Blacklung is the non-specific character of the symptoms. And I might add to that the non-specific character of the physical examination. When you pick up your stethoscope and listen to the chest of a coal miner, it's no different. If he's very sick with Blacklung or what have you, than listening to the chest of a person who smoked too much, or a asbestos worker, or somebody who got his lung disease by some perhaps more honest route, okay, or less honest route as the case may be. In other words, there is nothing about the way the miner presents with his difficulty that marks his trouble as occupation. There's one thing coal miners have that nobody else does: the spit coal. And that's about it. The things you hear with your stethoscope are the same. The kinds of complaints they have are the same. The short of breath, they cough, they produce sputum, and they wheeze. Somebody with asthma could do all that. With severe bronchitis. There is another thing about the miner, besides the fact that he spits black, that is typical, and that occurs in no other, and that's certain aspects of his x-ray. Certain aspects of his x-ray is typical. But by and large, the first dilemma is the fact that the disease, as it's perceived by the patient, is really no different than the diseases of the chest that occur in the population at large. And so the same thing can be said, therefore, of the non-specific character of the physical signs, all right? Non-specific physical signs. If you put 5 coal miners in a room, 5 non-miners, all of whom have terrible lung trouble, and the doctor is not permitted to look at his sputum, all right? You can't tell who's the miner. And they're all got the same severity of trouble. So that the physical signs, things that we do with our stethoscope, with our fingers, don't help you identify a person's troubles. The one thing, and it's been run down, I think wrong to run down, that helps you with that is the x-ray. The x-ray is not a bad machine. It can be very helpful. It was never meant to take the place of your own head and your own tubes. But the x-ray constitutes proof of exposure. Coal mine does. So much so, for example, that in Britain, where a great deal of the early work on dust control was done, the measure of dust control that was introduced in Britain in the 40s was not so much the gravimetric measure, all right, going in the mine and taking the samples. They'd say, let's see the x-rays of these men who work in this mine every 5 years and compare progression rates. And the x-rays were getting worse in mine A, and they were pretty stable in mine B. They determined that mine B had dust control and mine A didn't have dust control. Because the purpose of dust control is to prevent the x-rays from getting worse. So you may as well measure it by taking the x-rays. Of course, that's being done in this country too, with the x-ray surveillance program. So while politically, for reasons we'll discuss later, the x-rays come into disrepute, obviously because there are some very sick miners whose x-rays don't show the spots I'm going to demonstrate. And therefore it was in their interest that the x-ray be downgraded. The x-ray is very valuable. And I personally don't like to hear, oh well, the x-ray doesn't count, because it does. It's an index of exposure, and it's the only one we have in the living mine. Only one. It's the x-ray. In the deceased miner, the game's lost. You get a good index of exposure, you take his lung out and look at it. And they can actually ash it and see how much dust is in it. But hopefully we're not here to do research, but try to help you. All right. Those are 2 reasons why it's a problem. The third reason why it's a problem is because the x-ray itself, while an index of exposure, you said, right, is not an index of disease. Now we're getting kind of complicated, and I'll try to explain it. These are the why Blacklung, okay, is hard. I hope you can read that. You don't have to take notes. This is why Blacklung is hard. It's hard because the non-specific character of the symptoms. non-specific character of the physical findings. And because while the X-ray is a pretty good index of exposure, it doesn't tell you anything about disease. What does that mean? It means you can take an X-ray of man A, and it looks worse in terms of the amount of dust it will show you than man B. And yet, when you examine man A, he's in better shape than man B, for possibly other reasons. What we're saying is that there is no automatic correlation between the X-ray and the severity of the disease in the individual. There are probably overall gross correlations. In other words, I would say that 1,000 fellows who have an X-ray that we call Category 3 are probably worse off than 1,000 fellows with Category 1. And I think I can prove that. In one of the papers that Mr. Ross was referring to that I wrote early in this business show that. That would apply to 1,000 fellows. But it doesn't apply to you, or you, or you, one individual. That's one other reason Blacklung is hard, and why it's controversial. If the X-ray were a really super good measure of the person's health status, we could use the X-ray in different ways. Now, there are exceptions to this, and that's further why it's hard. Because when you reach a certain X-ray change, which we call complicated disease, and I'll show you what complicated disease is, then we can properly make inferences that X-ray is telling us not only an index of exposure, but an index that something has happened that in almost all circumstances makes people very sick. So this is true of simple pneumoconiosis, all right? Simple CWP, but not a complicated CWP, in which the X-ray is a very accurate guide, not only to exposure in this case, and maybe to something besides exposure, but it also tells you that this fellow's got bad trouble. You can tell it just by looking at his X-ray. This does not apply, however, to the bulk of coal miners, to a distinct minority, where we have the complicated disease. What's the fourth reason that Blacklung is hard? Because coal miners are not immune to the diseases that occur in the general population. They came from the general population. All right? So, coal miners also get non-occupational lung disease. Sometimes we can tell. Sometimes you can look at a coal miner and say, your trouble is bronchial asthma, and you, coal miner Jones, would have had that if you got a college professor or a doctor or worked on a farm. I've never seen the inside of a coal mine. I believe you would have been sick. Anyway, at this point in your life, age 45. There are people like this whose disease has certain characteristics that you can say with reasonable certainty, yes, coal miner Jones, you would have been sick if you never had a mine. But in most cases, you cannot do that. In most cases, you're confronted with the fact that the end product of a disease may look the same whether the person worked in the mine or didn't work in the mine. He may have bronchitis, he may have emphysema. We see this in our day-to-day practice among people who never saw the inside of a coal mine. So that's what makes life also difficult. What else makes Blacklung hard? It's chronic, okay? By chronic, we mean it takes 15 to 35 years in average work conditions of exposure to develop signs and symptoms related to that exposure. Well, I've seen cases with only 7 years exposure. We've got some slides we're going to show you tonight from Europe. I think they're from Europe. I don't think they're from this country, which shows some fantastic disease in some very young people. I hope you don't think these are from another day, I suspect. When a disease is chronic and when there's a long time lag between exposure and disease, evaluation is very difficult. There are certain kinds of diseases that occur in cotton workers, in which they're sick on Monday night. They come into the mill after a weekend off, and they get exposed to a certain kind of dust that occurs in the processing of cotton. And by Monday night, they're short of breath. That's easy for you scientifically to handle, all right? Because if on Tuesday, or the following Monday, you say, now you stay home this Monday, and it doesn't happen, you've got a nice experiment that took a week to perform, which told you that something in that plant caused this person to get this way. Not so coal mining. In coal mining, it may take 15, 20, 30 years debating the Congress how long it really takes. That's one of the issues we're up for right now. 15, is it 15, is it 30, is it 35 years before you can say, well, what you're seeing is really the product of this exposure. All right? So that makes life hard. Mary's sister got tuberculosis, spit all over Mary. Mary came down with tuberculosis a month or two later. All right? That's a pretty easy experiment. I think all our relatively straightforward, simple minds can comprehend that. We got TB from Mary. Okay? It happened last week or a month ago. Our x-ray changed awful fast. We had an x-ray on her 6 months ago was normal, and now it's full of stuff. All right, since her sister came home from the same. All right. Not so in coal mining. Chronicity introduces problems of other illness in terms of evaluating as a person's disability due to this occupation. The sex problem is the one that you probably heard about. There's another pathogen at work. Okay? Most people, some people, I don't know what percentage nowadays. Cigarette smoke. All right? That's a known respiratory toxin. It's known to cause emphysema. The diagnosis of emphysema is almost unheard of in the absence of exposure to it. Emphysema is one of the final pathways of Blacklung. Coal workers and pneumoconiosis, as we'll show you in the slides. And so when the miner has had an exposure to two toxins, I shouldn't use the word toxin because actually coal dust doesn't operate as a toxin does. It's not directly toxic itself. But let's say two noxious agents, one cigarette smoke and the other coal mine dust, it is difficult and to assign responsibility. And then the final element that makes Blacklung hard is host resistance. Yes, fellas and ladies, there are coal miners who work 50 years in the mine and come through absolutely unscathed. Same exposure as their colleague, worked hard, worked on a continuous miner, 35 years, 40 years, 45 years, x-ray normal or near normal, chest findings nil, zip, unscathed. So there's that a disturbing element. Not disturbing to the individual, very good for him, but disturbing in terms of your understanding of all the complex issues here. That this isn't an automatic thing. If cancer strikes, it's going to give you trouble. There's nobody who can say with there's a fantastic low percentage of people who apparently develop some immunity to cancer without being helped by medicine. There's host resistance to TB. There are certain diseases there is no host resistance to. But there must be host resistance to coal mine dust. And what the nature of that resistance is, we really don't know. Some people think it's what we call a mucociliary apparatus. These particles we're talking about are very tiny. The dust you see when you go in the mine is not the dust that gives you black lung. The dust that's visible to the naked eye is not the dust that's too large. The dust that gives you black lung is 5 micron in size or less. It's invisible. You inhale it, and some people probably clear it more effectively than others by virtue of the lymphatic system carrying away these particles or by their bronchial tree coughing them out. So what can we say then, given all these 7, and I'm sure there are more factors, that in the individual case, it's really a complex intellectual task when you're confronted with an individual person. There's all this constellation of consideration has to be put in your head when you say to a minor, and I think doctors ought to be very careful about what they say to coal miners. Not because they're trying to defend their company's economic interests or the unions, whether they want to get a pension or not. I think they should be careful from the intellectual standpoint as to what the relative weight of the occupation was, the trouble you're seeing. And I think you can only be honest with people in this regard. Now, given that, you would say, well, you never know. So let's give up. And that's exactly where we were in this country for a long time. It was decided prior to the late 1960s, may I? It was decided prior to the 1960s that certain things would be accepted as gospel. And because of these things, we say we don't know, and so we don't even acknowledge there's such a problem. And so before, there was the states had what's called silicosis laws. And everybody agreed that when a coal miner has silicosis, which is different from blacklung in many ways, and if it could be argued that the disease was actually silicosis, he would be compensated for it. In other words, responsibility would be assigned to the industrial process if he got silicosis. Because of the complex nature of this other, it was not faced up to until the last 7-8 years, both nationally and at the state level. Why did that happen with silicosis? Because silicosis had, in certain places, some embarrassing properties. It had those properties we talked about Systemaris TV. You ever go to Hawk's Nest in West Virginia, you can stand over and look down on a railroad tunnel, which is very picturesque and very pretty. And it goes to the Gauley River. And it's pure solid concrete. And the people who worked on that in the early 30s had a fantastic death rate. Some of them were X-rayed before they went to work. And they had such high silica exposure that they died like flies on each other. It was like a military operation, the Gauley River Tunnel. And so that silica had some of those properties of certainty. This certainly will do you in with his exposure. And so most states had silica laws. And if you could convince a state compensation board that what your coal miner had was silicosis, he could get compensated. And it was called stages, depending on the size of the nodules, small, medium. I remember in Ohio, not only arguing at the same time about CWP, about Blacklung, with people who claimed they didn't even see what I was looking at. Not just what its significance was, did it mean anything? Many people said, well, it doesn't mean anything. But they actually didn't see it. They said, that's not there. They so believed that coal dust was innocuous. And you could argue that they simply refused to see it. It was a real psychological phenomenon. Now, before I show the slides, I'm going to summarize these dilemmas. If no miner ever smoked, if we knew which 18-year-olds in our general population were going to become victims of other lung disease and excluded them from the coal mine, and if black lung disease had a marker, something in the blood or urine that was present when he got it and when he was suffering from it, and was not present in a healthy miner and not present ever in a non-miner, we wouldn't have any problem. None of those exist with pneumococcosis. All right? They exist with certain other diseases. What does that mean? It means that we have had to develop a humane approach to black lung, one that takes into account the fact that occupation does produce disease. We've had to develop this notion of presumptions and assumptions based on our statistical understanding of these diseases. And the presumptions relate to the fact that we know we have a pretty good idea of what the population in general suffers in the way of lung disease. And we have a pretty good idea that when you see certain things on an X-ray, they're associated with disease in most people, but not all. And we have a pretty good idea of what coal miners suffer in terms of disability, function abnormalities, death rates, for one thing, which are 4 times the other general population. And knowing it for the group as a whole, then we tried to create in law certain presumptions and assumptions that would help you through this, so that you wouldn't be defeated by this in every case. And the latter part of this presentation will discuss what those presumptions are, and I want to show you some slides. Raymond?
Murray?
Yes.
You seem to third-party resistance is one of the problems to define this as enormous.
Third-party resistance. What do you mean by third-party?
And respond the idea that some party would be responsible.
Well, there are a lot of words. There was that.
For compensation.
There was that. But you know, there was also scientific resistance. J.B.S. Holding, a progressive, even a radical in Britain, the First World War, coal dust is innocuous. John L. Lewis, coal dust is innocuous. All right? You know, so the list of villains in the piece is not only, you know, the industrial complex. You know, there was a large part of the scientific complex and even the liberal community, too. Now, what you're looking at here is a picture of a real lung. Not the whole lung, but a slice of lung. All right? This is a technique known as the Goff technique, named after a Welsh pathologist, in which a lung, if you picture a razor blade or a nice salami or pastrami knife, okay, in a delicatessen, slices this lung after it's inflated, blown up, at the time of death. All right? And this is that's not a normal lung. Are they?
So there's a 16-year-old boy.
That's a 16-year-old boy?
Yeah, was killed in a car accident.
Oh,
That
well,
shows right
in the
there.
car accident, he got a hemorrhage here, all right? Okay, it's a 16-year-old boy, so it is a normal lung, with the exception of this is what proved it. In the car accident, he bruised his lung. But other than for that, it's a normal lung. Now, what are the characteristics of this lung being normal? The one thing, you see large air spaces, large bronchial tubes, but you don't see small air spaces. They're invisible to the naked eye on this slide. Next, please. This is a normal lung also. But it's a normal lung of a coal miner. I see that's my hand on it. Young coal miner, who all probably died from something unrelated trauma. Seeing this number of small air spaces is normal. These are bronchioles. If you realize the lung is sliced, cut into section, this is the left lung. It has two major divisions. You'll see in normal people a certain amount of blackness in lungs. That's the fact that in this world we inhale some soot and smoke every day. And almost all of our lungs have this, or if not more, blackness to them. But this is a normal lung. And this is a large airway that's been cut through, somewhat smaller, but you don't see the real small airways in this lung. Go ahead. All right, does everybody see this? Now, I want to have some editorial license here, if permitted. This X-ray is not this fellow. This is a Welsh coal miner, healthy, and this is not his X-ray. What we did in preparing this lecture for you is put together an X-ray that we thought was comparable, as close as we could from our knowledge of these things, to what this lung looks like. So you'll get an idea of what it looks like when you look at the whole lung in the X-ray. And these are both normal. This is a normal lung, and this is a normal chest X-ray. The thing that's normal about a chest X-ray, incidentally, you know about X-rays, I hope. Black lung is white on an X-ray. An X-ray is a negative. If something is black, it's white on a lung. If something is dark, it's light on an X-ray. All right? That's the heart. It shows there's a white place. This is air in the lung. Black. This is the man's shoulder. That's the air in the room. All right? So in the lung, air is black, and spots which you'll see, which interfere with the air, are white. And those may be fluid is white in a chest X-ray. Solid stuff is white. Okay. Normal. All right. Now we're seeing something that's more than what a city dweller would accumulate. There is no city dweller that I know of who would get this amount of pigment, coal dust pigment in the lung in the course of a lifetime. Some people, you're surprised, get a lot, but this is more. than you'd expect to see. But you don't see any distortion. Can you go back one, Ray? That. All right, this is the basic architecture, what we say, what a lung looks like. Now let's go back. Okay. You don't see any of this is magnified. You don't see any real distortion of this lung. It has the same basic, the difference is that it's speckled with black. And this is the case of an individual who has simple pneumoconiosis, so he's got category 1 or 2, probably. All right? It would possibly show in his x-ray. But it would be fair to say that you would not expect him to be sick as a result. What it tells you, however, is that he's already had enough exposure, depending on how many years he's worked in that mine, and how old he is, that were you to be able to see this in real life, you would say, well, he's headed for trouble. But at this point in time, he's not having trouble. His x-ray is positive, and he could go to Charleston, and they'd examine him. All right? Because he got a ticket of admission as a positive x-ray. Next. This is upside down, but it's all right. Now you're beginning to see something you've not seen before about Blacklung. That occurs in the course of time. You're beginning now to see air spaces dilate. The basic architecture lung is not really greatly distorted, but if you look carefully, you'll find that this black pigment has now begun to be collected with a certain pattern. And the pattern seems to be that the black pigment is around white holes in the lung. All right? There are collections. And these collections are called macules, meaning a spot. A macule is a spot. A macular rash is a kid full of spots. A macule is a spot. And the macules seem to be around holes. And these holes, Dr. Goff described as focal emphysema, and they represent the first sign of distortion of the lung architecture. This is probably not enough to give symptoms except perhaps on extremes of exertion, and even then, doubt. All right? But you're beginning to see holes, and you're beginning to see visible on a lung section emphysema, some amount of distortion of a basic lung architecture. Next. All right? Now, this is also upside down, but it doesn't matter. This one's upside down, that's right. My buddies did a good job here. Put these together. You're beginning to see there's some focal emphysema. I would say this probably is a comparable or perhaps even less severity than the one I just showed you. There's no distortion lung architecture. There are macules, all right? And there seem to be, although it's a small magnification, there seem to be some holes developing. And what do we see in a comparable x-ray? The earliest changes of a positive x-ray. If you remember that first x-ray was black, you're beginning, and the way to look at these x-rays is to look at this, a square between ribs. To study. Here's such a square. Here is such a square. All right? Here is such a square. There's the rib in behind, in the back, and there's the rib in the front of the chest. You're looking at this chest back to front. This rib seems to be in front of you. That rib behind you, behind the screen. You're looking at it back to front, and you look in these squares, and you see that that's not normal. It's not all totally black. And if you look at it carefully, there are spots here. And those spots are the summation of these macules, we think. And I'm probably right. The summation of these macules that constitute the positive x-ray for simple pneumoconiosis. Next. Now that, I think anybody, where you're all radiologists by now, and pathologists, and I think anybody would say that's not normal. All right? This is far advanced, but still simple pneumoconiosis. This is the old classification, trust FDM. It's still category 3. And it means that the entire lung is involved. There are no areas that are normal on this chest x-ray. And there are these white spots, which are substantial, both in profusion, the amount of pepper or salt that you've thrown on this, and they're beginning to be substantial in size as well. Next. Now, here you're seeing again a little farther advanced. This lung section could possibly correspond to the x-ray you just saw. You might expect to see something on the x-ray here, which we'll talk about. But this represents this large contact spot. But you're seeing a lot of macules. They're denser. There's perhaps a little more dilatation of the air spaces. And here is again the same thing. Simple pneumoconiosis. Fairly easy to see. It depends, I don't know how it looks from back there, but at least from here it's fairly easy to see that there's CWP in there. And again, here is a substantial amount of infiltration. Larger conglomerate areas. These macules are getting bigger. And down here, they seem to have coalesced in one glob pigment, which is very important when we come to discuss what makes people sick on Blacklung next. This is a blown-up slide of a macule, and it shows it in relationship to air sacs. This is a normal appearance of the air sacs. Here's dilated, what we call focal, meaning in small unit emphysema, in association with it. And the reason is probably, we don't have to go into it, there's a choking effect that this coal has. People traditionally thought pathologists coal was totally innocuous in the lung. It couldn't do anything to the lung. It just sat there. And it had no effect on function. It had no effect on architecture. Not so. It was discovered as only in the 40s, this phenomenon, this choking effect on the smaller units of respiration, producing these blown-up areas. Yes, next. All right. Now you're going to see some awful looking x-rays. This is a minor who's got simple pneumoconiosis and is developing now complicated disease. And what is complicated pneumoconiosis? It means instead of these small spots, as you'll see in some of the subsequent slides, something happens. And we said it's not only exposure, but it's the reaction of the body. You get a what we call a fibrotic effect. All of a sudden, scar tissue forms. At some point in the game, people used to think that point was when the tubercle bacillus invaded. That's been pretty much disproven. Other people think that there are other things that might produce that scar tissue formation, a reaction of scar tissue. Rheumatoid arthritis seems to be a bad disease to have if you have black lung, because when they both occur together, the scar tissue forms. In all likelihood, it's a quantum phenomenon, because in most cases it simply means that there's so much dust accomplished that the body's reaction to it changes. I mean, so much dust that's been accumulated that the body's reaction to it changes and scar tissue forms. You're beginning to see that in this x-ray up here. Next. Now this is about as far advanced you can get in with simple pneumoconiosis. You have a complete distortion of the architecture of this lung. There's almost no normal lung left. There's a great deal of these wide open, dilated spaces, emphysema. Next. And again, marked distortion. Here's some areas in which we're beginning to get a large collection forming scar tissue. I think on the film, we selected this film because this we would probably call already, would we not, Dr. Heron?
Yeah, these are standard films.
This we would call a category A complicated, the earliest form of complicated pneumoconiosis. If those of you interested in the compensation aspect, this is what we're talking about. It is now assumed by all the parties to the controversy about Blacklung that this means bad disease. If you got that x-ray, you automatically get an award. You don't have to prove anything. You just have to bring your x-ray with you and get it read by somebody who knows what he's talking about. Next. Now, this is what that scar looks like. Here you see the background of focal emphysema, the background of dust, accumulation, and then here you have a phenomenon in which this scar has become so large that its blood supply has been compromised. The center just liquefies, like the center of a rotten piece of fruit, rotten apple. It just liquefies. And the miner who spits up black ink in large quantities, that's what he's doing. He's showing this out. And it actually appears sometimes on the x-ray as a hole or a cavity. It's most easily confused with tuberculosis, because the same thing happens in tuberculosis, except that in this lesion there is no tuberculosis. And the same thing can happen in silicosis. And in this, there's no silicosis. Next. Same. There's the appearance. Here's the cavity on the x-ray. Little hole in the middle of the scar. All right? Little hole in the middle of the scar. Very bad. This is almost always means far advanced disease. It's almost always associated with a great deal of symptoms, shortness of breath, bona fide trouble. This patient also happens to have a lot of emphysema. His diaphragm is distorted. He has a long, narrow heart. And he's probably got bad trouble. Next. Let's try to upside down, but okay. Again, a big scar, a lot of emphysema. Go. And this is some more horrendous looking x-rays. Bilateral scar tissue. forming large, what we call B-sized, actually this is probably a C now. Go ahead, Ray. And this shows really excellent simple pneumoconiosis, a lot of peppermint salt, and also scar tissue, what we call fibrosis here. Next. Same, worse, bilateral disease, great deal of simple pneumoconiosis. This fellow's only 42 years old. He worked in some awful mine in 1946 in Europe somewhere. We see that sometimes in 40-year-olds, but not often in this country. Go ahead. More of the same. 38-year-old. It says Collier, I suppose that refers to Britain. That's a British expression.
And I think 18 years exposure.
Yeah, which would be unheard of, I think. Almost unheard of with 18 years here. Go ahead. All right, here's again, a very severe case in which there's a certain amount of silica. Yeah, right? That looks like silica in here. This is probably combined silica and co-workers disease. There's a certain amount of silica in this lung. There's a mass of the lung is almost all, the upper part almost all replaced with scar tissue contraction. There's probably vascular damage. This is the kind of thing you see when CWP is associated with right heart failure, with heart disease at the same time. A great deal of pigment, and a great deal of emphysema, and complicated disease. Next. And an X-ray again showing large. These are not mostly what we see, the early ones. Go ahead. More what we see. Go ahead. Go ahead. That's about as bad as you can get. Once in a while we see this. That's what I meant when I said in certain cases the X-ray can tell you that the fellow has trouble. You don't need to. When you've got that kind of X-ray, you've got trouble. You don't. The X-ray is real good then, but it's too late. Go. Again, a gob section, enormous amount of scar tissue comparable to what you just saw in that film, and a lot of pigment. Did it? All right, this fellow's going to die from his trouble. He will die, I'm sure. He's got the only lung you can see is the site of an enormous amount of emphysema. Too black. Lung is replaced. There's already heart disease in this film. He's probably in heart failure at the same time. The heart is dilated and has a shaggy border. In addition to all of this trouble. Next. And here's a terrible looking gob section. Enormous large cavity. No silica in this film. All right. And multiple areas of fibrosis, as well as marked distortion of the whole architectural lung, emphysema everywhere. This could correspond to an X-ray such as you just saw. Okay, let's get this. Just to show you all what a gob section actually is, I've got one here. I think it's one of the ones you saw. You see that the actual lung is mounted on paper between them. And it's a razor-thin slice. All right. Now, before we go to questions, we'll have a few minutes. What do you really have to do then? What's our obligation to you when you got this set of circumstances? The first is not to stand there and natter and say, see, you smoke cigarettes. Well, that's the end of Blacklung. Okay? Instead, you've got to make some logical assumptions about this thing in order to have effective social policy. That's why in the Blacklung area we need social policy. We need social policy made not by doctors, but by sensible citizens who are trying to accomplish something. And what kinds of things ought we to consider making social policy? One, the time factor. If social policy somehow could guarantee, along with dust control, that total lifetime exposure could be controlled, we might have a mechanism of prevention. That is why we're now thinking in terms of options that would be created by law which would favor an option of return for a certain number of years of exposure. Not because we say every coal miner has worked 35 years in a coal mine. And by we, I'm talking about me and a few other people. Right? We don't say 35 years means every miner will get Blacklung because that's ridiculous. We've already said people work 50 years. We're saying as a matter of social policy, because we've got a problem of considerable magnitude, that there ought to be some limit established. That would create, the first assumption, I shouldn't really go to that, because that's the last, the first assumption was to say, if after a certain number of years exposure, a minor can be proven by medical evidence to have a chest disease that's disabling to him, it will be assumed that that disability is a result of occupation. We don't believe in every case that is so. We understand that creates an error. It's an error in his favor. The opposite assumption was always an error against him. The opposite assumption was that he had to have silicosis or complicated disease for it to be ascribed to his occupation. We're convinced that that produced error against him. Now we're saying we're producing an error in his favor. All right? By assuming that after X number of years, I think in most statutes, since 15, if he does develop a disabling illness, that illness will be ascribed to his occupation. Now, the first problem was the X-ray.
For most of you, it's a charitable trust agency that 1846 by the bituminous coal contract, and has been perpetuated in successive contracts since that time. Up until the last contract, the name was the UMWA Welfare and Retirement Fund. The coming onto the scene of the federal legislation regarding pensions, it was necessary to divide the fund into 4 separate funds. And so in this contract that was signed in December, the name of the organization was changed to UMWA Health and Retirement Funds. So if any of you have been used to the other name, like most of us have, you'll find it difficult to talk about the funds rather than the fund. There were many changes made in the funds by contract at the last contract negotiation. And I'll try to, with the help of these charts, explain these to you. I might explain that I made these charts myself because I had so much difficulty understanding the new pension regulations that I thought it would help me to put it out in charts, and in fact it has helped. There may be some small areas that are still gray, but I tried to make most of them green, red, black, or blue. So let me start right out with, I have 3 charts. One, this is Mike's pointer. One chart is on the pensions for retired minors, and one chart on widows' benefits, and another one on disability pensions. And I'll start out with the pensions for retired minors. You will see that in this chart, basically is divided into two halves. The first half has to do with pensions for retired minors who were retired or will be retired before January 1, 1976. They fall into the 1950 pension plan. And the minors who are retired after January 1, 1976 fall into the 1974 pension plan. The 1950 pension plan essentially says that at age 55, a minor who has at least 20 years classified service, 5 of which have been since May 1946 when the funds began, in signatory minds or with signatory employers, that is, employers who were signatory to the Bituminous Coal Operators contract, or have 10 years of classified signatory service, 3 of which have been since December 31, 1970. That's a big kind of a mouthful, but that is the basis of the 1950 pension plan. And people who retired before, or who will retire before January 1, 1976, who meet either one of these two qualifications, fall under the 1950 pension plan. Now, if they were retired when this present contract was signed, which was December 6, 1974, they are entitled to have a health service card, which identifies them as eligible for the health benefits of the fund. And a year later, December 6, 1975, they will continue that card, and December 1976, they will continue with that card. Insofar as their monetary pension is concerned, December 6, 1974, if they were retired, their pension was increased from $150 to $200 a month. December 6, 1975, it will be increased to $215 a month if they are receiving a Blacklung award at the same time, or it will be increased to $225 a month if they are not receiving a Blacklung award. Then a year later, December 6, 1976, it will go to $225 a month if receiving a Blacklung award, or $250 a month if not receiving a Blacklung. Now that essentially is the 1950 pension plan. You get to January 1, 1976, individuals retired after that date fall into the 1974 pension plan, and the earliest retirement age is 55, and they have to have 10 or more years signatory credit. Now, if they're retired in 1976, their benefits will be $12 per month times the years of signatory credit for the first 10 years of their working in the mine. They will get $12.50 per month for the second 10 years, $13 per month times the third 10 years, and $13.50 per month for each year over 30 years. If they're retired in 1976, the 1976 retirees will receive a $10 a month cost of living increase in the next year. If they are not retired until 1977, this amount goes up from $12 per month times the years of signatory credit to $12.50 per month times the years of signatory credit for the first 10 years, $13 a month for times the years for the second 10 years, $13.50 for the third 10 years, and $14 for each year over 30. In both of these cases, men retired in 1976 or retired in 1977. $7.50 per month is awarded for each year of non-signatory credit, not to exceed 15 years in 1976, and this goes down to 14 years in 77, 13 years in 78, 10 years in 1981, and thereafter, so that for the first few years, non-signatory credit is given at $7.50 per month. A footnote to those retired after January 1, 1976. They must have been employed in a classified job for a signatory company on December 6, 1974 to be eligible to retire under the 1974 pension plan. Anyone who was not employed with a signatory company in a classified job at the time this current contract was signed cannot retire under the 1974 pension plan. And another asterisk regarding the age for retirement. Terminating employment in mines after 10 years signatory service, but before age 55, a miner is eligible to receive pension when he reaches 62, or an actuarially reduced pension anytime after after he reaches 55. But if he receives an actuarially reduced pension, in the event of his death, his widow will not get any benefits from the fund. Now, this is complicated, as you can see in my reading through it. I'm sure if you don't already know it, it's not going to stick in your mind. I will leave these charts here, and if any of you want to take a look at them after the meeting, I'll be glad to try to explain them to you a little further. Widow's benefits was an important part of the current contract, and I've divided the widow benefits presentation into 3 time frames. The widow of a minor who died before December 6, 1974, widow of a minor who died after December 6, 1974, and a widow of a pensioner who dies after December 6, 1974. Really, it's 2. Here's the widow of a minor who died before December 6, 1974, the widow of a minor or a pensioner who died after December 6, 1974. Widow of a minor who died before the current contract was signed, if she has not remarried, and if the minor was receiving fund benefits at the time of his death, or if he was killed or totally and permanently disabled as a result of a mine accident, the widow is eligible for a health service card for herself and dependents until death or remarriage. A health service card which makes her eligible for the health and medical benefits that Dr. Hunter will describe a little later. Widow of a minor who dies after December 6, 1974. This is an active minor, not a pensioner. If he dies in a mine accident, his widow will receive some basic death benefits. If she has 1 to 5 dependents, she will receive $7,500. If she has 5 or more dependents, she will receive $8,000 to $10,000. If there are no dependents, a designated survivor will receive $7,500 if it was a mine accident. In addition, the miner who is killed in a mine accident, his widow receives $10,000 cash plus $100 a month until death or remarriage, and continues to be eligible for health benefits. If the miner dies, but it was not a mine accident, basic death benefits only are granted to the widow. However, she continues to have a health service card after his death. Now, the widow of a pensioner who dies now, that is now in the future after December 6, 1974, if he dies before January 1, 1976, and there are no dependents, the widow will receive $2,000. If there are dependents, she will receive $2,500, and in both cases, she will continue to be eligible for health benefits. If the pensioner holds out and dies after January 1, 1976, the same amount of money with dependents, the widow gets $2,500, without dependents, $2,000. But widows of miners who were widows of miners pensioned in 1976 and 1977 will be eligible to receive 50% of the miner's pension until death. So a miner who is retired in 1976 or 77 and dies after January 1, 1976. Well, you can't can't die after, can't be pensioned after he dies. But if his death occurs after January 1, 1976, the widow will receive 50% of the minor's pension until death, and also be eligible for the health service card. Now, widows of active minors eligible for a pension but have not yet retired will receive 50% of the pension he would have been receiving had he been retired. This is patterned somewhat after the military, which I really am more familiar with in working with it than the minors. But if an officer in the military is on active duty and has finished his 20 years or his 30 years and is eligible for retirement, but still keeps his commission and dies before he's retired, his widow will get 50% of the pension that he would have been receiving had he been retired. And this is essentially the same thing that happens with the minors under this contract. And finally, the disability pension. The applications for disability pensions just came out this week, and we haven't had much experience yet with processing those applications, but insofar as I've been able to determine from the regulations, it goes something like this. First of all, disability pension. All disabled minors receiving disability pensions are eligible for health service cards for themselves and dependents. And they are eligible for a disability pension if they are totally disabled as a result of a mine accident after May 29, 1946, the date the fund began, and eligible for Social Security disability benefits. Now, if this mine accident occurred before December 6, 1974, there is no age or service requirements that the individual has to meet. And he will get $125 a month until age 55. When he gets to be 55, if he does not qualify for a pension, he will continue to receive $125 a month while remaining disabled. If at age 55 he qualifies for a pension under the 1950 pension plan, that is, he's 55 years old and has 20 years classified service, 5 with signatory employers after May 29, 1946, or if he has 10 years classified signatory service, 3 of which have been since December 31st, 1970, then he qualifies for a pension, and he will get regular retirement based on age and service under the 1950 pension plan, which I described in the first chart. Now, this is if an accident occurred before December 6, 1974, the date of the current contract. If the accident occurred on or after December 6, 1974, he will receive $125 a month through this year, 1975. And at that time, if he has less than 10 years service, his pension will continue at $12.50 per month, at $125 per month for the remaining period of disability, just as it is here. But if at the end of this year, a man who has been injured after December 6, 1974, if he has over 10 years of signatory service, at the end of this year, his pension will be recomputed on the basis of $12.50 per month for each year of signatory service. And as I say, this is a fast presentation, and it really merits, if you're interested in understanding it, I think it merits a little closer look than I've been able to give in these few minutes. I might say that the pensions and disability pensions, widow's benefits, survivor's benefits are a fairly new feature insofar as regional offices are concerned, because up until a year ago, they were all handled out of our central office in Washington, D.C., and the regional offices handled only the medical program. So my 6 years with the fund, the 5 years working in the medical program, I think I'm more versed in it than I am in the pension program. I don't have to have charts to kind of lead me along. I just want to mention, as a way of introducing Dr. Hunter, that the medical and health program of the funds has evolved over 20-some years, almost 30 years now. And it's evolved sort of in the vanguard of medicine in this country, nationally. One of the first groups to really recognize and give stature and impetus to group practice, multi-specialty group practice, and by non-profit groups. And we've tried to keep that, in the forefront, and one of our sort of prized examples of the kind of group practice that we feel our beneficiaries do best insofar as their care is concerned is the kind of group practice that is right here in the Fairmont Clinic. So it's really fortunate for me that I can kind of bow out of telling you any more about the health program, because Dr. Hunter is much more wise in it than I am.
Hi, Barry. Well, before we let you go, does anyone have any questions of Dr. Smith about that? Because I have one or two.
I've got one. If someone retires, okay, after the December of 76, he has to have it 20 years to get the same amount of benefits he would have gotten under if he retired before 74. Is that right? I don't know if I understood that.
If I understand it now.
Well, okay.
If he retired
After January the 3rd, 76, he would almost have to have in 20 years to get what he would if he retired before January the 1st.
Well, his first 10 years, $12 a month, he'd get $120. If he worked 7 more years, he would get another $100. Yeah, almost 20 years, right.
Dr. Smith, what about the widow of a non-active? First of all, I have 2 questions. This disability pension applies only to death benefits. Has nothing to do with death or disability. I mean, disability for members. Applies only to disability for members.
No, there's a gray area there that I haven't indicated, but it's not death, it's total disability.
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
disability.
But there is something in the regulations about Blacklung and occupational diseases. I can't tell you what it is because I'm not familiar with it.
But the
But
welfare,
the main thing is mine accident.
the health and retirement funds, which I'll now start to use the right lingo, are not going to do the determination. They're going to accept Social Security. Or are you going to get in the business of disability determination? Is that right?
Well, I hope not. However, the regulations does not say, and has a Social Security disability pension, but is eligible for Social Security. Now, people can be eligible.
You can regard yourself as eligible, but then the time
Well,
comes. The Social Security may say,
I'm
sorry.
sure
Never do it. Go get it.
I'm sure there'll be a gray area there, but up to now, I've seen about 3 pension applications. All of them have turned in their Social Security disability benefit paper along with it. So
Now, I have one other question to ask you before we get to the medical care stuff. The widow of a minor who died non-accident, let's say a heart attack, who was under age 55. She gets the basic death benefit.
Right. Plus, keeping her health service card alive for remarriage.
And this is this apply to a minor or a minor on pension? Here you said widow pension.
No, those last two are pension.
All right, what about-
No, the last one is a widow of a pensioner. The first two are widows of minors.
All right, but what about the widow of a pensioner who died before the census? They're getting it covered. Pensioners, widows.
The widow of pensioner who died before December 6th, if she is not remarried, and if her husband was receiving pension benefits at the time of his death, yes, she has her card. Or if he was killed or permanently totally disabled in the mine.
Can I ask you more question about the disability pension? Does the regulations say and is eligible for Social Security disability benefits? Isn't everybody eligible? Is it worded or not?
Yeah, the word eligible is theoretically ineligible. Somebody may have agreed with me. Now, you want me to talk about the health side of the fund? I'll try to...
Leave those up there, Doctor. They may,
Yeah.
I think they're not interfering with anything.
If that generates any late blooming questions, just raise your hand. All right. We'll refer back to... As far as the health side of the health and retirement fund, I've been personally associated with it since early after its inception, since 1953 in Ohio. And I think we ought to understand certain things historically, which Dr. Smith referred to about the United Mine Workers. Used to be Health and Welfare Fund. And now we're going to call it Health and Retirement Funds. But let's just say the fund. This development occurred as a result of, whether you want to say Mr. Lewis's idea, or the idea of people around Mr. Lewis, or the idea of people in the industry, was sparked by the Department of Interior study. You perhaps know or don't know, some of you, that during World War II, for a time, and shortly thereafter, the government ran the coal mines in the United States. I think it was it Navy or Interior? It was the Department of Interior.
right.
And they Krug, right, Mr. Krug was the czar of the coal industry in the United States for a while. And as part of that takeover of the coal industry for a time, under those circumstances, a health survey was conducted. And arose out of that something called the Boone Report. And the Boone was an MD admiral, Admiral Boone, who went to the coal fields and wrote what is still today a remarkable document. And its description of health conditions in the coal fields. It was a large document, so big, full of illustrations, and a really first-rate, beautifully done health survey. And what it said was what most knowledgeable people already knew, but it said it in a very moving and very beautiful way. It acknowledged the fact that coal miners, for the most part, lived not in urban settings, but relatively isolated hollows. That they had medical services on a contract basis where they had them, which meant that while they had access to a general physician, usually hired by the coal company, they did not have access to what was then, in the late 1940s, modern specialist services. They did not have access to good hospitals. They had access to poor hospitals, usually non-accredited hospitals. That they did not have access to rehabilitation services, and that the residue of illness and disability as a result of mine injury and accident was extreme. And generally it pointed to a picture of the miners being left behind by what then were regarded as up-to-date modern standards of medical care in the middle of the late 1940s. The action that the union took and which the industry agreed eventually following a struggle with major proportions was to make medical care part of the cost of production code, which was really a radical development in American labor history. To make the health of the worker part of the cost of production. Workmen's compensation was not new. Workmen's compensation has been around since the turn of the century in one form or another. And it was assumed that under workmen's compensation, that industry would be responsible as part of the cost of production for job-related accidents and, where it could be proven, job-related illness. This is not the health of the worker now. The assumption was always that the health of the worker was his own affair. That it came not off the top, not before his wage, but after his wage was collected, and he would be responsible for seeing to it. And the agreement that established the welfare fund really established the concept that the health of the worker was part of the cost of production of the material, and was built in, became part of it, therefore became part of the collective bargaining process. That's a concept that since has grown, of course, in other industries. But in the mining industry, it grew in a very, and it's amazing, it grew in a very, what we regard, those of us in medical care, in a very healthy way. And its spin-offs in other industries were not so healthy. You would think that the first would be the worst, and that the latter would be represent improvements on that first path. First of all, its funding was related to production, to productivity. And that was a key element in the health of the miners' health program. It did not, I suppose, take a brilliant foresight to know that this industry was headed for mechanization, and the workforce was going to go from 500,000 to about 150,000 within a decade. That productivity in American coal mines was going to go up with the introduction of machinery. And therefore, the cost of the program had not to be calculated on the basis of capitation, that is, so and so many dollars per month per worker, but so and so many dollars a month into a health fund per ton of coal. If you will visualize in the automobile industry, in most other industry, it's the worker who's insured, not the workforce, not the totality, but the worker. And so that today, therefore so and so many dollars a month are spent per worker to buy an insurance policy. Whereas in the United Mine Workers and in the coal industry, from the outset, was the notion that these health resources were to be expended for the membership and widows and those others eligible for health care at large. Now, there's a key difference here. The difference, of course, is that the way United Mine Workers and the coal industry did this lent itself to the development of what we know today, the fund, an organization designed to maximize the utilization of these monies for health protection. Whereas the path that the major AFL-CIO-related industries lent itself was to buying health insurance. Well, we'll buy them a policy, and we'll help pay part of the premium. This is not related to money. This is a negotiated dollar amount. It's renegotiated every time. And it will go up as health costs go up. And I would stress to you that the difference between the United Mine Workers medical program and the medical program of not all, but virtually all, industries of comparable size, rests in this very structural difference. What's the difference between the worker in a plant in which insurance is bought? In essence, he is told, well, you're now employed here and you've used up your 60-day waiting period. You now have health insurance. You then go and use it if you need it. We're no longer interested. We've negotiated this for you. You have your health insurance. If you're sick, go to a doctor, go to a hospital emergency room, read the fine print, see what it covers, what it doesn't cover. There are exclusions. There's exclusions in the miners' program. And then the collective bargaining mechanism reacts to that experience in terms of what they're going to get next year or the year after. There is no effort on the part of the union, which is one of the signees of the contract, to govern the behavior of the membership in regard to medical care. Not so in the union, in the United Mine Workers Fund. The United Mine Workers Fund from the outset has to be different from an insurance company approach, which most of organized labor is taking. What does that mean? It doesn't just pay bills. It attempts to organize and provide medical services. One of the first tasks of the health fund, when it was first established, was to take that backlog, that residue of paraplegics who were in the coal fields, and at great cost to its early reserves, send them to large rehabilitation centers in New York and New Jersey. They made Dr. Rusk at NYU famous, because all of a sudden he had to put on him 150 paraplegics with bed sores who'd been lying around in the hollows of Kentucky and southern West Virginia. And he was supposed to now have the wherewithal to do something about these people. So that the fund from the outset was designed to provide solutions to the medical care needs of its membership. Whereas those other collective bargaining arrangements, almost exclusively, until we got into the late 50s, early 60s, which other attempts at group practice and development related to trade unions emerged. But by and large, the average industrial worker in an AFL or CIO-related plant did not see his union or his collective bargaining instrument, whether a union or a joint industry union program, attempt to organize and provide service for him. It gave him coverage if the money had to be spent. And the result of that, of course, is that this had to be renegotiated, because when you do that, you generally develop inflationary pressures in the health system. When you try to make solutions to medical care problems, you may not overcome the inflationary pressures, but you're at least working on them. So that what typified the medical care program was assistance to the beneficiary. Now, if you have traveler's insurance, the health insurance, and you fell a friend down the street, your friendly insurance man, has sold you this along with your mortgage insurance and whatnot, he is not going to come around and ask you, now I think you ought to do something about that chest pain. All right? I think you ought to maybe see about, perhaps I can send you to thus and such hospital. That's not his function. Because he thought you protected him. You're supposed to take it from there. So there were a variety of maneuvers open to the fund in how it was going to accomplish this. It had a very difficult job, because the miners were scattered over 20 plus states, I think 26 states, and the pensioners were scattered over more than that. The working miners in 20 plus states. And usually in small communities where it's not like the auto industry, when the entire industry is virtually in one town. And large segments, sub-segments of it are in other large towns. By and large, the fund's experience in the health field, at first, perhaps naively, its medical leadership thought, well, we've got all this swell fund now let's just work with the doctors in the field, and they'll get the miner used to be the worst patient in the office, because he was one they had done his bill. If he wasn't on a check over, he was now the best patient in the office. Everything was going to get paid. But there were problems, and I think anyone who goes into quality assessment, quality assurance as part of his responsibility to a membership finds that there are problems. And the fund tried several mechanisms, and they were principally, I would say, 3 in number, that typified its days of controversy and struggle and leadership in the organization of the medical services in the United States. The first mechanism was a list restriction. If there are 70 doctors in the community, and you have a fund, and you're responsible for the health of 700 or 7,000 people, and you deal with 70 doctors in the community, even though only 35 may be needed, the chances are that you're not being selective in terms of need, you're not being selective in terms of practice, and you'll have little influence or input on that doctor's practice. So one of the first major maneuvers of the fund carried out in the middle 1950s was to deal only with that number of physicians that felt necessary to to take care of its membership, and it selected those physicians on the basis of their cooperation with the general aims of the fund program and quality performance. That automatically made for the fund a controversial element in medical care, because it introduced the concept of selectivity. Not necessarily always on the basis of quality, maybe sometimes on the basis of availability, on the basis of willingness to cooperate with the fund program and its desired objectives. But once you say we would go into a community with a fund of money, howsoever small, as we've learned, howsoever small, and say we'll deal with Dr. J and not with Dr. B, you're asking for a considerable amount of conflict to put on. And it's happening more and more in that other institutions of money that they need similar solutions. Second thing that the fund did, these aren't necessarily in chronological order, is that it recognized that the major abuses were in the area, major abuses I should say, the major, were in the area of surgery. In the coal fields, there was a tendency for surgery to be done by less than qualified people, especially in smaller relatively hospitals. And along about the same time, it issued rules and regulations to the effect that surgery on coal miners could only be done by qualified surgeons. Now, those who had passed some objective test of qualification or had membership in a surgical society that went along with that proof of quality, a board. You know, in medical care, most anyone is happy administratively with a person will see you when you have a cold or a sore throat. But when it comes to major surgical procedure, there are two kinds of pressure. There's the emotional pressure on the patient and his family, because this is regarded as a major moment in life. I happen to be an internist, and I think a major moment is when you get a prescription for digitalis. Much more important than who takes your bed and stuff. That's my own bias. And it's also a major moment in the financial life of any health plan, because for reasons that we won't have to expand, an hour spent in an operating room is worth more than an hour using your head in the office. Always has been. This is medical care economics, and it's difficult for us to understand its basic rationale, but that's the way it goes. This generated enormous amount of controversy. The third thing that generated controversy as far as the health plan is concerned was the fostering and development of group practice. And this was the major thing that the fund did in terms of bringing abroad new medical talent into the coal fields. In the settings in this part of the world, there were developed outpatient clinics such as our own, and those near to us in Ohio and Pennsylvania, and in southern West Virginia and Kentucky, hospitals were developed, and group practices were built around hospitals, the Appalachian regional chain of hospitals. This represented an awareness on the part of the fund that it had to bring its own people aboard, in the sense not that it owned them, but as people they recruited into the program, and who did not have a prior stance with respect to the coal miners. In its early days, it usually brought people in leadership of a fair amount of ideology, who were partisan to the objectives of the fund program, and were able to stand some of the gap that occurred in some of the conflict that occurred in the early days of these controversies. Some group practices were more successful than others. Most lasted to this day, some did not. But in all cases, we found, those of us who were involved in group practice development, the fund support to have been generous and appropriate and courageous. And we think we can measure what the fund got back as a result of that. We're sometimes not sure. We think they got back disinterested services because the doctors in these practices were not salaried. We think they got back quality services because the doctors in these clinics were by and large pre-selected on the basis of their proven ability. And we think they got back a focus on the medical and social aspects of the patient rather than money funds as an incentive in the care. So in summary, from the standpoint of the health program of the fund, as a physician who's been associated with fund-related programs for most of his professional life, the fund gave its patients more than just the wherewithal to go to a medical facility and spend resources. It gave them leadership and direction as to how to maximize that resource to his benefit, how to make it efficient, how to avoid duplication, how to rationally use his medication. And in other words, to use the system and to attempt to mold that system and to create it. We say that one of the problems with the medical care system or not system today is that people don't have access to it. And when they get it, they don't know how to skate their way around and through it to get what seems to be appropriate to them. They may get into it, but they never get the exam they want. All right, there's a lot of jokes, medical jokes have to deal with that. The fund has always helped, I think, its beneficiaries feel that they're part of the system, that they have partisan but at the same time professional leadership in helping them not only get access to that system, but intelligent and rational use of the system. And I'm not going to specifically spell out what the benefits are. No deductibles in the fund program that I know of. Medicare was this fascinating progressive development that turned out to be not so progressive. It turns out the deductible, as it gets higher and higher, is more and more of a deterrent. It's preventative value. So the fund has always stressed prevention and development of that outpatient services. Your average insurance policy does not cover you. If you decide to try to take a preventive posture and go to the doctor before you're sick, the doctor either has to lie and put down a sick diagnosis because they're only paying for sickness. The fund has never been embedded. The fund has provided, has urged people to use preventive services, has always paid for preventive services. As you know, under Medicare, maybe you don't know, you can't go get a pap smear because it's a good thing to do. We put down some diagnosis. The over 65 patient comes in, lady comes in with a pap test. You have to put down service